I'm going to review in this video a little bit about what I talked about in the previous video about the first accounting statement ever published by the Financial Accounting Standards Board back in 1973. Now, I had talked about current and non-current rates, and actually the non-current would actually be the historical rate. There is an exchange rate that is set at the time you buy something overseas. Let's say you bought a souvenir from Great Britain. Well, at that point, let's say the United States dollar, for every $100 of United States dollars you had, it was worth 120 British pounds, okay? Well, that's all great and dandy, except that exchange rate changes daily. Okay, I know it doesn't change on the weekends, but 5 business days a week, that exchange rate changes ever so slightly. Sometimes the British pound is worth more, sometimes the US dollar is worth more. It just depends on the day you're actually buying stuff. Okay? So, the current rate is the value of the item in, say you bought it in British pounds, okay? So the value of the item in British pounds for the day that the balance sheet was created is the current rate. Now, that may be different than what it was the day you actually bought it. Let me tell you something. In companies, especially large companies, when you have tractors or cars or machinery of some kind, they have to state the value of that equipment every month. And the value of the British pound compared to the US dollar changes from day to day, 5 business days a week. So therefore, at the end of each month, that exchange rate is going to change. Alright? So when you state something at the current rate, you're actually stating it at the rate that the British pound and the US dollar is against each other on the day the balance sheet is created. Now, that could be radically different than that of what it was when you actually bought the item. Remember, you're using the item after you buy it. So that exchange rate is going to change periodically as you continue to use the item. Of course, the item's value itself is going to change due to many factors, and I'm going to cover those with you right now. One of the things is depreciation. Your car depreciates, your house depreciates, lawn tractors depreciate, and I could go on. Power tools depreciate, and that's because the more they're used, the more worn out they become, and so eventually they're not going to be worth much of anything, and somebody may either sell it in a rummage sale, or they may just pitch it on some kind of a stockpile so that they can take the metal out of it and recycle it. That's depreciation. Alright? Now, they also have amortization, and I know my pronunciation is not that great on this, but amortization is basically a depreciation of something that is not a tangible asset, and that would mean some sort of brand name. There are actually values to brand names, like the Hershey bar or the McDonald's burger or something like that. These trademarks and brand names and whatever, they're valued, and their value, of course, depreciates over time. And so when you have amortization, you actually have a devaluing of these brand names. Now, sometimes that gets revalued and it goes back up, especially with things like the Hershey bar or the McDonald's hamburger, but certain brand names do finally depreciate in value, and eventually they ain't worth anything at all. Just like a power tool or whatever else. Okay? Now, what is an impairment cost? Well, that's when a value is overstated. What that means is that at a certain point, a piece of equipment depreciates so much that when it's being used, it doesn't bring you back net profits in as much as you're expecting. So at a certain point, you just have to knock off an impairment cost to say, hey, this equipment's not bringing in as much revenue as I counted on when I first bought the item. And so therefore you knock that value off to give a more accurate value of the asset you have. Let's say a power tool is being used on a regular basis, and after a while that power tool being used to fix up equipment, well, that equipment's not selling as much, so it's not drawing in enough net revenue to justify the value of the power tool you're using. Well, at that point you have to subtract a little bit extra off of the power tool to say it's not drawing in as much revenue as it should. And that's because it's worn out more than what we expected it to do. So there's an impairment cost. Alright, I'm going to talk about more of these terms in a future video, so stay tuned.